Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rebecca. As you pointed out, I'm the Senior Content Manager at GHD Digital, and I am thrilled that you've taken the time out of your day to join us today. As you no doubt are aware, cybersecurity has become a critical area of focus for municipalities everywhere. The stakes are very high when it comes to protecting citizen data, public infrastructure, and community trust. We are fortunate to have a panel of speakers today who are well versed on the subject, and each will bring a unique perspective to the discussion. Ben Barnes is the IT director at GHD. Ben has extensive expertise in building resilient IT infrastructures and will share practical insights into the steps municipalities can take to secure their digital environments effectively. Shannon Devane is the Municipal Risk Program Manager with LAS. Shannon is well versed in municipal risk management, and she'll discuss proactive measures municipalities can implement to reduce vulnerabilities. Finally, we're pleased to welcome Detective Constable Nate Matthew from the Fulton Regional Police Service. Nate brings his experience in cyber investigations and will provide insights into cybercrime trends affecting municipalities, along with the very important role law enforcement plays in combating these issues. And now, without any further ado, I will turn things over to Ben.
Thank you, Rebecca, and welcome everyone to a great topic. Really something that's quite important in sort of the world that we live in now, specifically post-COVID, and of course, where municipalities have had to really move into a digital age of bringing services online, and of course, the landscape that's created for threat actors as well. So the first slide, this is really just to give an overview of the threats that we're seeing out there, and I think some of this is fairly commonplace and known by most, but I think it really bears really a focus in the sense of the discussion that we want to have today, in the sense of really focusing on these four here. I could have picked so many more, but these four items here really seem to stand out when we look at the threat landscape that's out there, and they actually avenues that threat actors are using to try to infiltrate organizations, and specifically with a focus on municipalities. So looking at ransomware, that certainly sits right at the top, and it's evolved. With the evolution of AI becoming much more commonplace now, it's certainly something that we are seeing as an opportunity for the threat actors to really take those and then again use that in terms of targeting their victims. Maybe Shannon, I'll kind of pass it to you a little bit in the sense of, from what you're seeing from an annual standpoint, what are you hearing from your colleagues, or at least the clients that you have that are either talking to you about their concerns about about ransomware, or at least the issues that they've been facing when it comes to the topic of ransomware?
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, lots of conversations, and we've been having conversations for quite a number of years at this point, especially on the insurance side of it. Cyber in and of itself is a new coverage. It used to be folded into other what we call the crime coverage, and then suddenly it became such a thing that it had to have its own coverage. So we've been talking about it on the insurance and risk side for a long time. But what we're seeing from a municipal standpoint is there is that it's the unpredictability of it. We are seeing municipalities in Ontario being targeted this year. Of course, everybody knows we saw Hamilton receive dealing with an incident, and within, I think it was a month or so, Huntsville. So, we had a very big municipality, and then suddenly a smaller municipality was facing the same thing. And that's a different experience for those entities, again, depending on what they've moved online, their operations, and just the size and scope of their operation, because of course that varies across municipalities. So we're seeing municipalities really looking at, what's the best way to protect ourselves, keeping in mind that there isn't an unlimited budget in terms of IT work. There is that balance of everything else that they have to fund through the tax base. So there's lots of conversations about what's happening and just what's the best way, to really protect ourselves.
No, that's a great point. I mean, you talk about the financial aspect of it, which is certainly an area which municipalities struggle with, right, when it comes to being able to keep up with those. We're hearing that ransom demands are at all-time high right now, where before we were talking about perhaps maybe a few $1,000s. Now we're into the hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars as well. And another area that is really prevalent is their first point when they do seem to get in is targeting backups, because they're trying to essentially get in there and basically do the job of basically keeping you away from being able to restore. So then therefore you'd actually be able to pay or you'd want to pay. But the other part that I've been seeing as well personally is that I'm seeing a very good trend, which I don't know, maybe Nate, I'll ask you this if you're seeing this as well, in that more and more municipalities are, from what I can see, fighting back a bit and not paying ransom. Is that a trend that you're seeing in your area?
I would say that well, first of all, thanks for having me. I would say as a general pre-planning thing, most companies would say that they would not want to pay the ransom and that they would want to just sort of work through the incident. But the sad truth is that until you're actually in the hot seat and you're faced with the dilemma about what to do from a business perspective, because that's what it comes down to, it's a business decision. How badly have we been compromised? How much data has been exfiltrated? Is it on the dark net? Is it being sold?
Yes.
What is our cost per day that we're spending right now while we're down, or down cost time, and then leveraging that against whatever the ransom demands are going to be? That certainly is a decision that needs to be made at the time. You can have all the best interests, but until you're actually in the hot seat, it's a question that would have to come up with a consensus within the business.
Yeah,
I've seen both. If you talk about critical infrastructure, they may be more inclined to pay to sort of get systems back up online because there's a public safety element to it. Or a private business, if they have air gapped backups, maybe they might not be quite as impacted.
Right. No, great point. Thanks, Nate. In terms of looking at where we see, and I'll actually go back to the previous slide if I could, Rebecca. So looking at some of the other areas that I've got here on the slide here, phishing and social engineering, we certainly know that those are their main approaches, and and that's, we've actually seen changes of those now getting into the smishing attacks as well, where text messages are becoming sort of the the easy area. And I think that's a lot to do with just busy people. We're coming up around tax holiday season right now, tax season coming up. And that tends to be a very good time to be able to see a rise in these attacks, just because they're trying to take advantage of the situation. Supply chain in itself, I personally feel is one of the highest risk areas when it comes to, in line with obviously with ransomware and such. But when you look at the makeup of municipalities, historically, there's been a lot of connectivity either to third parties that are supporting the municipalities, whether it's just suppliers that are coming in, plugging in their laptops to fix HVAC systems or other technologies that the municipalities may have. And that is one area that, I certainly always put a big red X around it when it comes to, and we'll get into a little bit more in terms of, some of the differences approach that we can see what municipalities can take to try to defend themselves against that. And then of course, personal identifiable information, PII, being the sort of the target point. We're seeing the dark web, really advertisements on the dark web just skyrocketing. I think the latest we've seen about a 20% increase since 2022 in the expected advertising in the e-crime sector, which really shows that the supply is there for the threat actors to be able to mine this data, be able to get it, and of course turn around and sell it. Let's go to the next slide. So in looking at the common threads, I've alluded to a bit of the aging infrastructure. I think that's something that is certainly a major target because of just age, right? Which leads into outdated software that is not patched. So therefore, a lot of vulnerabilities that are there, and unmanaged network and weak authentication. You sort of put those two pieces together. They're prime real estate for threat actors to utilize to try to get in. And in some of these cases that we've seen, that is where the infiltration is happening. You're seeing them going through unauthenticated endpoints or just devices that are sitting there doing their job, but obviously are quite out of date and not being managed. And through all of that, you still have that tied to a supply chain, whether again third party that provides a service that they themselves have weaknesses in their environment, but unfortunately you have this trust that's in there. So that's another real area. And as we've seen with this report that's come in, the attacks continue, right? They come in because they know that municipalities with budget constraints and sometimes even skill gap have the challenges of trying to get up to speed and really address these issues. So at the core of it all, what are they after? They're after your data. Right. I think we certainly know this, and there's such a pressure on organizations to ensure that the data is being protected. We look at the regulatory compliance pieces that come in place with PITA and other regulations that really put the responsibility in the sense of keeping data safe. And in the new world that we're in right now, and in the evolution of new different attacks, I think that those regulations are going to continue to change. They're after service disruptions, right? Taking services online to try to amp up their their ability to get you to pay the ransom and achieving their goals. And then digital transformation from what we've seen since COVID. And Shannon, I don't know if you've seen a big of a spike, but I think that there's a lot to be said for COVID and how COVID transformed municipalities and having to really bring all their services online, and what that means in terms of creating these target points for threat actors. Again, what have you seen in terms of the trend since COVID till now, and how that's changing sort of the line of work around the day-to-day, and of course what municipalities are having to do to protect?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have any data to back it up, but I can tell you I was working for a large municipality when the pandemic hit as a risk manager. I have no memory of the first 2 months of that because I was working to rebuild our systems online. I was incredibly fortunate in that the organization had elected to move into a risk management software platform. So my claims processing, I had already worked to get that into a system, which was a game changer for us, but then completely altered the risk for the organization just on that one front alone, to your point, in that was another system that the data was being stored in. But I've never seen anything like it myself in terms of processes that were once paper-based moving completely into an online platform. And that work continues today, as I understand it, because there's also some real efficiencies. Like I'm a risk manager, so I'm scared of everything. AI is terrifying, cyber is terrifying, it's all terrifying. But when I sit back and look at some, right? But I can see some of the efficiencies and some real wins that it had, even just if you go down to the micro level of how claims come into a municipality. But I think it's so important that everybody understands what that means. What data are we collecting Are we collecting? Why are we collecting it? Are we storing it? If we are storing it, why and for how long? So it really starts with a broad overarching understanding of what data we have, because that's what they're interested in.
Yeah, very, very key point, right? I mean, that classification is an important activity that is something that municipalities and organizations in general, certainly, I think you make a great point, right? You need to know what you have, and then once you know that, and now we'll get into a bit of that around sort of the programs that can help with that. But ultimately, I think when it comes to data, it's about maintaining that public trust. That's the key element here. So just a quick case study. If you're in it, you've hopefully you've heard all of these. I think we in the business don't want to hear it, but now these are events that have come up, and they are real. And I think ultimately the best thing to do is to learn from them, right? In the case of Hamilton, right now Hamilton is still in the midst. I am a resident of the Hamilton area, so kind of living it firsthand in the sense of the impact around the services and that the city's having. So I know that they're still running through it, but when we look at the city of Hamilton, I think one of the lessons that I'm hearing coming out of that municipality is just the focus on upgrading systems and really structuring your environment in such a way that it's really segmented. In the case of Huntsville, I think that was a reported breach that could have probably been worse, but kudos to the town of Huntsville for having a good program in place to try to really minimize the amount of impact onto that. Then, of course, we see with Holden Hill and Whistler, as well, kind of going through the same thing. But you know, at the bottom, we did want to highlight the one event, because it's not all about the bad, right? It's about this situation of that when you have good process and technology potentially in place that can help. And City of Toronto was noted to worth an attack that came through back in 2021, where they found threat actors trying to access health data and itself as well. But all of this combined, I think these are really good lessons for all of us to be able to look back on, understand, and really use that information. And I know that Nate's going to get into it later in the sense of how the information sharing becomes such the powerful engine to counteract the threat actors as well. So through all of this, what can you do? You know, there's a lot that can be done, but I think, you know, Shannon's already alluded to before, in that it starts with a risk management program. You have to know what you have before you can start putting a plan in place, starting to put the processes in place, putting a plan of action in place to be able to really, you know, as the title says, fortify your environment. And so through that, you know, we really look at utilizing this NIST model here that takes us through understanding what we have and then starting to put the bridges in place, right? So zero trust is an absolute, as an infrastructure guy, zero trust is number one. You know, and it's something that municipalities can do fairly easily today, right? Just making sure everybody's authenticated, anything is authenticated, running through your endpoints, running through encryption, right? All these good nuggets of information, you know, and the processes that tie to them are really key to them. So, you know, hopefully you're familiar with the NIST framework, but if you're not, we can share some of that information as well, because I think it's really a foundational piece in your arsenal in terms of trying to defend against threat actors, and something that will certainly help organizations again be in a better place overall in terms of your day-to-day operations. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to share. But what I'll do now is I'll pass it to Shannon, because now that we've learned about, you know, talked about a little bit more of what's been going on and the attacks, we'll kind of get into the how we respond to it and some of the legal implications that tie into it.
So thank you, Ben. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the incident response plan itself and some resources to consider. So, you know, as we do, I always like to start with some numbers. I just wanted to share these numbers from ISA Cybersecurity, which is one of our partners. We had an event last week, and these two numbers jumped up at me. So 11.5, that's the number of attacks per minute that are deployed across the internet. So that's fun. And then it's the pace of the movement of like how this stuff changes. So there's a 266% upsurge in the use of info stealers, which is the new weapon of choice by ransomware gangs, which I've always said these ransomware people, if they would use their powers for good instead of evil, think of what we could do. But here we are trying to combat people that are putting, quite frankly, a lot of people at risk with these attacks. I just wanted to talk about the steps. So it's really important, if you're not sure if your organization has an incident response plan, I would say reach out to your contacts. You can reach out to have a conversation with your emergency management folks, have a conversation if you have, you know, risk and insurance folks. If you have somebody who's simply procuring the insurance, have a conversation with the broker, and then talk to your IT people. Try to determine kind of where you're at. And as you're building the plan, which can't be built once and put up on a shelf, I think both Ben and Nate would agree with me on that. It's a living document, right? It needs to be monitored constantly, again, given the pace at which this moves and what we learn, right, from each incident. Municipalities are really good. They might not, with cyber stuff, and I encourage this as well, you know, don't put it out there into the ether to talk about what happened. But when you have those trusted relationships between municipalities in, you know, places where you can feel, you know, that you're safe and secure to talk about, there's real lessons that can be learned. And I think there's really something there. But you want to take a look at, you know, your operating systems, your technical infrastructure. Take a look at your assets, what's your current response plan, and how can that work with your business continuity plan, an emergency management plan. Unfortunately, as humans, we tend to wait until something bad happens before we really focus in on something. But right now, your business continuity and emergency management plans after COVID have likely changed drastically. So take a look at those plans and how does cyber fit in there. You can grab every subject matter expert you can find. And if you have insurance, if you have cyber insurance coverage, tap that resource. There's some really good resources available through these insurers. You want to build a cross-operational team to draft the plan. It can't be done in a silo. You need to bring absolutely everybody in. And consider your communications. If you have a communications team or if you're going to use somebody outside, think about how you're going to communicate to your residents, right? Because they're going to be nervous too, and they're going to be scared. Ben, I'm sure you can speak to that as a resident.
Absolutely.
Who's gone through something like that.
Yeah.
And then consider, your legal, your breach coach, if you have internal legal and law enforcement, which I know Nate is going to speak to as well, but these are all critical pieces you need to consider. And then you need to create a plan and you need to test it regularly. The role of insurance, and I saw really quickly, I think there was a question that came in about insurance and the role that insurers play. So I will weave that into this conversation here. But what we were seeing through 2020 and into 2023 was there were fewer insurers willing to take on municipal risk. There were insurers who were saying, we're out. We're no longer interested in taking on this risk. The ones who did stay, we were seeing higher premiums. We were seeing much higher deductibles and self-insured retention. So that's how much municipalities were paying. At the front, we were seeing co-insurance clauses. So that means that the insurer would pay 50% and the insured, the municipality, would be responsible for the other 50%, depending on the type of coverage. And we were also seeing a lot more stringent underwriting. So when I started, I was selling cyber insurance. I was working with a broker at the time, and the cyber application was 2 pages. When I left as a risk manager for a big municipality, my cyber application was about 16 pages, and I could only fill in the name of the municipality and my name. Everything else had to go to my IT people, because I'm like, I don't know, what it's asking. So it was a lot more. The carriers were saying, we want to know exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it, so that we understand the risk before we take that on. The important information to consider is, do you have a cyber policy in place? And if you do, what are the limits? What's the deductible? What does a coverage look like? Are there sub limits? What's covered and what is not? Again, that's just really important, because that's information that's going to come flying at you in the event you find yourself in a cyber incident. And it's really stressful to have to then go and look for that stuff. So that ahead of time. That's fantastic. Is incident response embedded in the policy? I can tell you I've had experience with it where the incident response is embedded in that insurance policy, but it's important that you understand how that works and that they know your team again beforehand. It's awful if you're in the middle of a cyber incident, you're trying to introduce IT people to your incident response plan folks. Insurance is not a silver bullet for this. It's just part of your risk strategy when you're looking at cyber. It's just a component of the overall risk strategy. So the cyber insurance markets definitely fluctuate. During the pandemic, the cyber, especially loss ratio, not loss ration, apologies. The loss ratio topped 400%. What does that mean? That means that for every dollar in premium cyber insurers were bringing in, they were spending about $4 in claims. They are for-profit entities. That is unsustainable. I've read some numbers. It might have even been closer to $5. So again, that's where you see insurers then start to really claw back on the coverage and really increase those premiums and deductibles. A lot of them too have mandatory requirements to receive full coverage. If you have cyber insurance and you find yourself in a cyber incident, it is absolutely critical you notify them as soon as possible / immediately. Start working through your plan, but notify them immediately. And once you breach that deductible level, they absolutely have a say in how the claim moves forward from that point. So they will take a look at the information coming in. They will take a look at the information at risk and work with you, but they absolutely have a say. Once you cross over that threshold and then you're into insurer dollars, they absolutely have a say in the outcome of the claim. When you're trying to get coverage from them and when you're approaching them, what you want to do is just show them that you're, the best risk possible. What you want to do is demonstrate how your organization is managing the risk. So you want to be able to say, this is what we're doing. This is our plan. Again, just showing yourself in the best possible light to say, we'd like coverage because insurance is a part of our risk financing strategy for how we're managing this risk. But these are all of the other things that we're doing to manage the risk. And then resources to look to, again, financial recovery is the one main component of cyber insurance, but the assistance is the other piece. I can tell you when I was at the municipality I was on the verge of losing my cyber coverage. I'd had it in place for about 4 or 5 years. And they were saying this isn't something we think we're going to take on. I was worried about the financial piece, but I had really smart finance people that I could turn to for help with that. Fortunately, again, being a bigger municipality. But what I lost sleep over was that was my incident response. That was part of my incident response plan. I'm like, if I lose access to them, that 1-800 number, who do I go through for help? What does that look like? So if I can't get this coverage, if no one will write it, what am I going to do? And that's where the concept of the CMOM program, so that's Cyber Incident Management for Ontario Municipalities. That's a program offered through LAS. We went out to RFP in 2022. We started the program April 1st of 2023. And what that allows you to do is purchase retainer hours. So it's independent of insurance. So we've created a retainer program, and there's 3 levels of that you can select from. There's level 1 is 20 hours, level 2 is 50 hours, level 3 is 80 hours. We also negotiated that if you don't use those hours for an incident in year 1, when you renew into year 2, you can take those hours and you can apply them to a project from a pre-approved list, and you can discuss it with ISC cybersecurity to harden your cybersecurity infrastructure. So that's a great plus of the program. Again, it lives independently of insurance. So you again want to look at whether or not you have cyber insurance, but if you can't get it, there's a program here for you. And in year 1, you can use some of the hours to build an incident response plan or to have somebody help you test it. So what we really wanted to do was put something in place that municipalities could access right away. So that's the CMOM program, so Cyber Incident Management for Ontario Municipalities. If you have any questions about that program, I'm happy to discuss that anytime if you want to reach out to me afterwards.
What's the are you finding, like, what's been the uptake, or at least the interest from municipalities, and are you finding any sort of trend between smaller or larger size municipalities?
That's a great question. We've had really good interest in it. We've had, of course, with some of the incidents that have been having with municipalities, that's also brought people coming to us and saying, okay, how does this work? We are finding the cyber insurance market is changing a little bit, and there are some municipalities that couldn't get coverage before are able to get it. So that piece works in there as well. But we've had really good uptake from across the sector. But we've got, every single type of municipality at this point is accessing the program.
That's excellent.
Shannon, I wonder if you could talk about, do you have any experience with the process that the insurance company takes to audit your systems ahead of time before they'll even invoke coverage? Because we know there's a wide stream of different types of networks that are out there. And you mentioned that you went from 2 pages up to 16 pages, which really is a risk assessment that the insurance companies are doing. But do you have any experience about the insurance companies physically coming to Prem to take a look at your infrastructure in order to be able to check mark the business, whether or not they're going to be able to conform to their minimum standards?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any physical visits, but I know of assessments that are done beforehand, and then they'll come back and say, this is what we found. And it's like, oh, so you really want to know what they're going to find before they go out and find it, has always been my position. Where that's really important is understanding what other networks and how they're managed, because they might not all be under the municipal IT. And we saw that the City of Toronto, they were on the news, so I'm not talking out of school. City of Toronto, it was their library was under a separate network. So again, it's just understanding where are your assets, how is it managed, who's managing what. But yeah, I have not heard of anybody coming in person, but I have definitely seen assessments that are done prior to binding the coverage. So before they say, okay, let's sign on the dotted line, you give us this much, here's the terms. They're going in and they're doing those assessments, and it's causing municipalities to have to take extensions on coverage, which is not ideal. So you could have a Jan 1 renewal date and you're extending that to the end of March because they need extra time to go in and run all of those assessments and decide if they're going to place the coverage or not.
I guess it's me.
You're up.
Yeah, Ben and Shannon, those were amazing talking points. The scope of cybersecurity, specifically with the scope within law enforcement, is really, really large. In the past, it was there wasn't as much collaboration between the public sector and private citizens and the police, but we really know now that the police are part of. We want to be part of the solution as being part of the problem. We're not the nemesis that perhaps the media has made us out to be. So the first steps we need to do is we need to have an introduction about what law enforcement does to aid the public sector, private sector, and the only way that we're going to be able to learn is with the collaboration of subject matter experts in these fields, and we really need to be able to build trust. And then as we build our trust with our public and private sectors, then we can really strengthen our defenses through our experiences and through our collaborative expertise. Okay, so what are the benefits of involving law enforcement early in the incident response plan? Well, first of all, you have to have an incident response plan, so that discussion certainly needs to happen. And for a lot of smaller companies, they may not even know what an incident response plan is. So just kind of understanding the fundamentals of how to strengthen your own network defense is critical. So the police, we can be part of the pre-attack planning. We can be part of the discussion about it, because once the company has decided to go ahead and go down this road, knowing who your point of contact is within your local police jurisdiction from a cyber perspective is really important, because you don't want to be calling the police for us to do a response without having knowledge of who the point of contact in that jurisdiction is. It's much more efficient if you've already introduced yourself to me and then you have my direct phone number, and then I can literally reach out to you as the incident is unfolding. So that comes down to the notification of law enforcement. So typically what happens is you would just call the general line for police service, and then a uniform car would end up showing up to the business that's under some sort of cyber attack. And then from there, everybody would be obviously very stressed out, not really in a position to be able to provide a really good brief to the uniform officer, who may or may not know what's even happening in the first place. And then from there, it has to go through our own internal queues until it comes down to my desk. So having the pre-attack planning with a point of contact with me will just save a lot of time and energy and frustration for the victim business or infrastructure. Okay, so being at the table while the business works through the incident. This is really critical, because there's certain things that I can do to help you guys, potentially help you guys in the background. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about briefly, so we have our micro incident, which is going to be at the business, and then we have our macro view, which is what's happening from a global perspective within that one case of malware or ransomware that you're being attacked with. And so this brings us into what are called IOCs, which are indicators of compromise. And these indicators of compromise are going to be trickling in as you guys are unraveling your own internal investigation as you're dealing with these attacks. So these come down to things like, what does the ransom note say? Who's taking blame or owning the ransomware? Is it the Hive virus? Is it Avis Locker? Is it there? And there's hundreds that are out there, but there's probably only maybe like 12 or 15 that are really current. And so once these IOCs, et cetera, start to trickle in for me, that leads me on to my next point, which is Europol. So how Europol works is there is a body within our European, within the European community of law enforcement. And what they do is they have this big office where there's a representative from every single country that is literally sitting in this big community room. And their job is to be able to have Germany walk over to Finland and ask them a question instead of having to go through all this additional legal process. And Canada's there, the United States there, basically every major friendly country in the world is part of this consortium, and each one has a desk. And so what happens is if you and I, as the victim company, have open lines of communication, you'll provide me the IOCs in real time, and then I literally shoot them up to our own internal quarterback, which is called the NC3, and which is an RCMP basically sponsored government arm, and they're in charge of collecting all of our national IOCs, et cetera, and then disseminating them through the rest of the world in real time. So if I know that we're under attack, the questions are going to have is, well, who's the ransomware? And then who's the point of contact within Canada for it? And then who's the point of contact within each of the different countries around the world? And then instantly they get our information. So if we know that it's a ransomware attack that has already been dealt with in the past, we may already have decryptor keys for it. And we may be able to shut them down as quickly as it started. Or they don't have the decryptor keys, but we may be able to provide those IOCs up to our partners, and they could say, oh, we have something similar that's happening over here, and provide us some insight as to what the process is for that one specific variant. And then on the last point, post-incident IOCs, as part of your incident response plan and your cybersecurity insurance, likely there'll be a forensic approach that happens afterwards. Well, they'll take one of your victim computers or network servers, and they'll do a deep dive on the inside to figure out what was the point of compromise, what are the different IOCs, indicators of compromise that are associated with the attack, how did the escalation leverage or privilege escalation happen, and then what was the lateral movement, was there any dwell time? And just to talk about dwell time for 1 second, for those that you don't know, so in the past, a bad guy, bad girl, threat actor would enter into your system, and then they would just kind of like hang out there for a little while, just so they don't push off any alarms. And the amount of time between the point of entry and then the point of attack is called your dwell time. So in the past, your dwell time used to be really long, but recent information has shown that that the dwell time right now is much lower, depending on what the bad actors like what their goals of the attack are. So as an example for that, like, do they just want to come in and do a quick hit and try to encrypt everything, or is their goal to actually exfiltrate most of your data, kill your backups, and then sell your data on the dark web, and then from there, then do the encryption, and then go ahead and do the negotiations. So leading into post-incident IOCs, like I was mentioning, once the forensic examination has been completed, then it's really important from a global perspective to be able to share that data through our international partners, because as much as we don't want it to happen to us, we don't want it to happen to anybody else. And then collectively, globally, we're able to have these investigations international, and there's many times where the bad actors are caught, and it's only because of the fact that global communities collaborate, share their information towards the greater good. Okay, so some misconceptions. Like everybody has a misconception about what the police's role is within the various sectors, but from a cyber perspective, like we're not there to take over. This is your business. We're not there to take over. We're not there to cause you any reputational harm. We're not there to do public statements about how a community or a business is under attack. In fact, we're not even there to get in the way. And we may not even be there from a prosecution perspective, because quite frankly, if we have Eastern European attackers that are over there, the likelihood of us being able to do any prosecution with them is low to nil anyway. But we can help, and the only way that we can help is if we have information sharing in real time, where we can discuss different issues, and then I might be able to get support from our global partners. Okay, so what does this look like? Well, so without naming the community, but I was invited just a couple of weeks ago to do a tabletop exercise with a local community, and they went under the emergency management system. And so for our government partners that are specifically dealing with like frontline and safety issues, they use this as an opportunity. So what I understand, every year they have to do two major exercises. So this year they decided to do a cyber attack exercise, which was foreign to all of them. So it was an unbelievable experience for them to be working through their incident response plan in real time as this scenario sort of unfolded, for them to go through all those awkward moments where they say, I don't really know what to do, or what do you think about this? And the dialogue that was going back and forth was amazing. And keep in mind too, that just because you've been attacked doesn't mean that you're going to have complete network failure. depending on how you've dealt with your own internal systems, only certain parts of your infrastructure could be impacted. And so from a tabletop exercise, one of the benefits is whoever's coordinating that can say, okay, well, now this has gone offline, or now this has gone offline, and how are you going to deal with this major issue, etc. They're honestly unbelievable, and they are so necessary, because if it's one thing to have an incident response plan, but it's another thing to practice it. Especially if we talk from, I'm cutting it a little bit off topic, but if we talk about from a legal perspective and from a communications perspective. So from a legal perspective, if your legal component of your business is in the mix as the cyber attack is happening and everybody is stressed out, there's no way for you to be able to have full functioning rational thought as these things are happening. And so the pre-planning aspect is so critical when you've already had meetings and discussions with whoever your partners are, your external partners are, for notifications such as PIPEDA, etc. You don't want to be thinking about, well, which privacy commissioner, who's the contact for there, who's the contact for the insurance company, who's the everything needs to be already pre-planned and laid out. So it's basically a checklist that you're kind of going through, almost like a workflow. And then the other part is your communications plan, whereas like, who's going to represent your company from a media perspective once this happens, and what is the communication that you're going to want to be doing? Because at the beginning, you're not going to have all the information. You're not going to know exactly what the scope is. All you know is that you've had an IT issue first thing in the morning, your network starts slowing down, and then things stop working. And so there's reputational harm considerations, there's liability considerations. And so your communications team really needs to consist of your legal and whoever is going to be representing the company, and coming up with a pre-planned itinerary of what information is going to be released, how is it going to be released, and what are the timings of the release. And I think it's very important for you to have that template down, because if you don't, you're going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling when it happens in real time. And the last part here, once again, is the information. I can't speak highly enough about how much it's important for the information to be happening internally within all of your different government structures. So like, as an example, if you're a small community, but you've got, say, eight significant sectors, it's important to have your sector heads come to these meetings, these pre-planning meetings, so everybody can have discussions and do what's called a business impact analysis, where you're basically ranking all of your different internal structures in order for you to figure out so like, which is the priority aspects of our community that needs to be sort of brought back up online for second, third, all the way down the chain. And these things may not normally sort of be discussed as far as a hierarchy is concerned, but let me just give you an example. Like, if your finance department is taken out, that means that people might not be getting paid for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And so, like, how do you as a government entity or private business deal with the fact that your employees aren't getting paid anymore? Etc. So the information sharing internally is important, and then externally it's very important too, because you can bounce ideas off of me or off your insurance company or whomever, and then by doing that, you're going to be able to be better prepared. How do we maintain and establish these relationships with law enforcement? So just the beginning, so cyber within law enforcement is growing. Like everything else, it's very technical, and provincially we have quarterly meetings as far as our cyber working group is concerned, and then we do have national meetings as well. So we do talk very often. Like, we're learning too, and we're getting there, and we have a lot of competence now within the space. So forums like this to be invited to is honestly, it's amazing for us to be part of the conversation, and we want to be part of the conversation. So depending on where you are, if you're in a small municipality, you're not going to have a local law enforcement perspective, but the OPP does have a very competent and capable staff, and they would honestly be very happy in one of your rural communities to be having these pre-planning discussions, because it's in everybody's best interest. And then you'll have a face-to-face, or at least an email or a phone call point of contact should any of this stuff happens. Legal discussion. So if you don't have legal, you need to figure out, if this happens, you're going to have to retain somebody. So are you on retainer? Do they have any experience, like Shannon was talking about, as part of the pre-planning insurance aspect of it? If you end up going with a incident response company, generally they have their own legal component to it. So you can either piggyback off of that part, or you would have your own independent counsel that can then sort of team up with the with whomever your incident response company it is that you decide to hire. And then the last and most important piece is you have to understand like what is the whole process of the attack going to look like, and the recovery, and then the continuity, and then you need to manage your expectations. So what does that look like internally? Well, if you're a small business or if you're a medium government, just because you've got your CEO and you have your leadership hierarchy going from top to bottom, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones that need to be in control should an incident happen. You need to identify, you need to be humble, first of all, within the company structure. You need to be able to identify like who are the best people to tackle all of these various issues that we're going to be facing. And you need to make them into a little incident response command team. And then from there, you need to give them some autonomy and money to be able to make decisions without having to go through the traditional vectors of getting authorization. It's basically like a war chest. And for the people that are sort of in the top level spots, yes, of course, like it's important for you to sort of understand what's happening, but critical decisions need to be made very quickly, and you need to have competent people on that incident response team in order to have the trust for them to be able to make those. So anyway, that's the process, that's managing expectations. I don't think I have anything. I mean, I could talk all day on this stuff, but I don't think I have any more on my PowerPoint slide. So anyway, thanks for your time.
Nate, I did have one little quick question for you, and the part that you talked about with regards to sometimes maybe the hesitancy to work with law enforcement. You know, what do you think is behind that, and what steps are law enforcement taking to try to bridge that gap?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but I bet you it's less than 10% of the time that we actually get engaged with doing any sort of incident. And I think the reason why, like there's two. So it comes down to when companies retain counsel, they typically always invoke the lawyer-client privilege. And so from that perspective, they don't necessarily want the police to be part of this client privilege with them. And I totally understand that aspect of it. I may not necessarily agree with all the aspects of it, because we can be, not included in some parts of the conversation and included in others. But the bigger portion, which I truly believe, is it's probably just more of an awareness issue that the police are able to be part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem. And it's only through things like this that I can get that messaging out and say like we have global partners that want to be part of the solution. And I have access to that. So if you have access to me, then you have access to people in Italy and Germany and the FBI and all these different places that are like everybody's in it. And the cool thing too is like if you take something like say the Hive ransomware as an example. If there's a Hive ransomware in Canada, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Peel region is the liaison for that. But what happens is NC3 then designates whoever that local jurisdiction is as being the jurisdiction to lead that one ransomware for the entire country. And so from that point, everything now filters through me. So let's say we have a brand new variant and you're the first person and you reach out to Nate. I would then become the national point of contact for Canada for the one thing. And then I would then have direct contact with whomever the other designates are in the other country. So from an information sharing perspective, things can happen very, very quickly. So that's probably the biggest reason why the police aren't in there, the client privilege. And then obviously the information. So if you're interested in the police having it and you have a lawyer saying, I don't know if this is a good idea, listen, like you make up your own mind, but we're not here to cause any harm. We're just simply here to help, and we want to help.
Yeah, great. All right, Rebecca, here you are.
So we have a couple of questions. The first one, it might have been addressed, but if someone maybe want to take a shot at answering it more fully, it comes from Nancy Yates, and the question is, with respect to ransomware attacks and paying the ransom, how can you be sure they will not up the ante if you agree? Do insurers pay a role on whether a ransom will be paid in a given situation, or is that solely a decision of the municipality?
Yeah, so I'll grab that from the insurer side. It's definitely, it's a conversation that you're having with your insurer. It depends, again, what your deductible is and where you're sitting in terms of total cost of that claim. But it's definitely, if you have a cyber insurer, they should be in the conversation and they would be a part of that discussion. I'll let Nate answer it. My experience has been that there's no one's going to tell you, oh yeah, pay this, and you'll never hear from us again. I don't know anybody that's offering that guarantee. But I'll let it turn over to Nate to see what he thinks about that part.
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So at the end of the day, you don't know, like you're honestly, it's a roll of the dice. However, most of these big companies are trying to run themselves like a legitimate business where they have help desks and they have people to support you through this turmoil that they've caused. And they've spent a lot of time and money creating this infrastructure. So if they're not able to provide good service back to the client, then that information gets globally recognized quite quickly, and then they lose any credibility. So from a business perspective, it's in their best interest to make sure that you guys get back up online quickly. However, there's no honor among thieves either. So you don't know necessarily if the decryption keys are going to work. You hope that they're going to work, but you don't know. Number two, you don't know if those credentials are going to be sold anyway for them to sort of do a double ransom, where now they're making money on two different vectors. And number three, all of the information that has been exfiltrated, you don't know what it is they're going to do with that. Typically, they're not going to be deleting that stuff. It's just going to kind of get to stick around forever. And then number four is you don't know whether or not you're going to get reattacked again, or if they're going to change the terms halfway through. Typically, though, the breach coaches do have fairly good success with negotiating with these ransomware companies. And so there's lots of examples where you start at $2 million and then you work your way down to 500,000 or 400,000, 200,000. However big, generally the amount of ransom that is asked for is proportionate to how big your business is. So if you're, they're not going to ask for $2 million if you're only able to pay 20,000. But that's why you need a good breach coaches to be able to help with those negotiations.
Okay, we have actually two questions from Yusuf Williams. The first is municipalities may not be able to meet the highest levels of the NIST standards. What level of maturity between 1 and 5 would be reasonable level for a municipality to strive? Will insurers view this as favorable when assessing a municipality's cyber risk?
Yeah, I can take that, and maybe there's a two-part. We'll get into the insurance part of it, but I would certainly say that levels 2 and 3 are a good starting point for municipalities. Really, at a minimum, level 2 getting you into the point of being able to use automation, which is highly important in this day and age right now in terms of, again, what we're fighting, and with the addition of AI, it becomes a daunting task. And so I think getting to that level 2 or 3, I think is certainly a great place for municipalities to be. It shows that you put the foundational pieces in place, right? You're getting the necessary training in place. You're putting the startup technology pieces that are important, not only for you to gain the visibility of what's going on in your environment, but then you've also done perhaps a bit of a risk assessment to understand the assets that you need to protect. And of course, looking at how you break up your environment to try to minimize any sort of a breach, right? So sort of looking at potentially like the Huntsville situation where, they had a problem, but I think that based on the way that they've actually crafted their environment, they were able to minimize that, see it right away, and then get on top of it. So my recommendation certainly from any municipality would be in that level 2 and 3 NIST standard for approach, and then of course work your way there. But Shannon, pass it to you on the insurance side. In terms of any sort of framework that is out there that applies to insurance coverage, is NIST one of them? And if it is, what level is put in there as more of a minimum as opposed to in terms of how you start out on that journey to secure your environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. In working with the cyber insurers, no one's choosing one framework over the other, like NIST over ISO or whatnot. If you have done work on a framework, then they want to see that, and that does, again, improve your position. But there isn't anything coming out of the markets right now that say, this is, do this and you get this much more coverage. It's a holistic view.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and our final question is, what's the best method to approach the cyber insurance application, knowing that a lot of the questions being asked are privileged and confidential, and our IT people may not want to share this information in order to protect our cyber exposures?
Yusuf, you're giving me flashbacks to my last renewal with the cyber insurers. So I would say, starting early, like months and months early. I got really close to even looking at an NDA, in those meetings, but ultimately what I did was got everybody, into a room to have those conversations. And try to negotiate, what that looks like on an application with the meeting that we had, in person, and try to respect everybody's position, and also try to build up comfort, with our IT folks, that the insurer is there ultimately to help, and that if we want to use insurance as, as a way to finance the risk, this is what's involved, and get that buy-in from senior leadership. But starting really early, was the key, and then, just trying to get a sense of where everybody's discomfort lies, and really get in and try to figure out how to smooth that over.
Nate, is there any perspective from the law enforcement lens that could add some context for this?
I don't know how common knowledge it is, but it's very, very easy for me to go onto just the open clear web and to get credentials. And part of my job, I collect credentials, and honestly, I have billions of records, which comes right down to email addresses and passwords, and all of us are notoriously lazy when it comes to implementing really good password sort of protection. But if it's very easy just to do a domain search for whatever your company is, and you're guaranteed to have dozens, if not hundreds, maybe even thousands of your employees' records that are out there. So an awareness part of this is really, really important, that the bad guys already have most of your information. And if you're a type of employee or company that allows you to change your passwords every 45 days from .1 to .2 to .3 at the extension portion, with a little exclamation mark, these guys knew that, like they know that too. So, and then two-factor authentication is really large too. So just if you have an awareness part where you're able to say, let's just change the way that we do our passwords, or let's have two-factor authentication. Your employees are either your strongest strength or your biggest weakness. And so an awareness campaign, when it comes down to that, is critical for success. And my last point just for that is there is a service called Have I Been Pawned? And then if you're the owner of a company in the domain, you can register your domain against this company, and they track all this breach data in real time. So if you have any one of your employees that is compromised, they will send an alert to you for a very nominal fee, just to let you know that some of the credentials has been compromised. So maybe that doesn't directly relate to the question, but I think just the awareness and managing expectations, I think, is probably a critical aspect of you doing your own overview of your company when it comes to any NIST or ISO platform.
Well, I would like to thank all of our presenters for giving us an awful lot to think about. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to actually come and listen to this. I think that we've all found it to be incredibly insightful. Thank you again to everyone, all the participants and all of the attendees. Have a great rest of your day.